Sarah was just an 11-year-old girl who went to the bikers club every day to study. But on that afternoon, a rushed stranger, an open window, and a crumpled napkin would lead her to uncover a plan that could destroy everything the community had built. Sometimes, the smallest details reveal the biggest secrets. That Tuesday afternoon felt like any other. Sarah walked through the neighborhood streets with her backpack heavy with textbooks, heading toward the place she considered her second home, the Bikers Club reading room. The old mansion housed more than motorcycles and leather jackets. It was a community hub where locals gathered, where stories were shared over coffee, and where Sarah found the quiet she needed to focus on her homework. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of motor oil mixed with old books greeted her, comforting in its consistency. But before she could take another step, someone rushed past her with such force that she stumbled backward, catching herself against the doorframe. A young man wearing a dark cap pulled low over his face slammed into her, nearly knocking her down. His head stayed down, his movements jerky and urgent. No apology, no glance back, just the sound of his sneakers hitting the pavement as he disappeared around the corner. Sarah stood there for a moment, her heart beating a bit faster. The encounter left a knot in her stomach. She adjusted her backpack and continued toward the reading room, trying to shake off the unease. The room was empty, which wasn't unusual for this hour. Sarah chose her regular spot by the window, pulled out her math homework, and settled into the worn leather chair. For the next several minutes, she worked through equations, her pencil scratching against paper in the quiet space. Then she felt it, a cool breeze across her face. Sarah looked up, confused. The air conditioning wasn't running. She turned toward the office area and froze. The window behind the desk stood slightly ajar, a thin gap letting in the outside air. Her brow furrowed. That window was always locked. Always. The bikers had mentioned it multiple times. The old latch was tricky, so they kept it secured to avoid problems. She set down her pencil and walked closer, studying the window frame. "You never open this window," she murmured to herself. "Why would it be open today?" Sarah called out for Elijah, one of the club members who usually worked in the back office. His heavy footsteps approached, followed by two others, Linda and Tom, both longtime members. "What's wrong, kid?" Elijah asked, his weathered face showing concern. Sarah pointed at the window. "That wasn't open when I got here last time. You always keep it locked." The three adults exchanged glances. Elijah moved closer, examining the frame. His expression darkened. "This window was forced open. Look at the marks here. Someone used something to pry it." The room suddenly felt colder. Linda immediately checked the office area while Tom started looking around for signs of disturbance. Sarah stood still, her mind racing back to the collision at the entrance. The hooded stranger, the rush, the refusal to look up. Her eyes swept across the office space. A moved chair, a missing book, a light left on. Sarah noticed these things the way other kids noticed new sneakers or popular songs. Her teachers sometimes found it annoying, but her grandmother always said it was a gift. That's when she saw it. Next to the computer desk, partially hidden by the monitor's shadow, lay a crumpled piece of paper. Most people would have dismissed it as trash. She approached slowly and crouched down. Her fingers smoothed out the wrinkled napkin, revealing a familiar logo printed in brown ink, Corner Cafe, where neighbors become friends. The neighborhood coffee shop, 3 blocks away. Her pulse quickened. The napkin was wrong here, deliberate. The bikers never brought items from that cafe into the office. They had their own coffee station in the main hall. Finding this here, near the computer, on the same day as the forced window felt deliberate. Elijah noticed her focus. "Find something, Sarah?" "This?" She held up the napkin, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. "This is from Corner Cafe. Do you ever bring things from there into this office?" Elijah shook his head slowly. "Never. We keep this area clean. Important documents and the computer are in here." The pieces clicked together. The stranger in the cap, moving too fast, head down, avoiding recognition. The forced window. The computer. She suddenly noticed it was still on, the screen glowing faintly. And now this napkin, a breadcrumb left behind in panic or carelessness. Linda had moved to the computer. Oh no! Her voice cut through the silence. There's a USB drive plugged in here. Tom quickly moved to her side. Within seconds, he had disconnected the device, his fingers flying across the keyboard to assess the damage. The screen filled with code and error messages. It's a virus, Tom said grimly, designed to erase financial records. I caught it before it finished, but this was a targeted attack. The room fell silent except for the hum of the computer fan. Sarah stood there, the napkin still in her hands, feeling the weight of what she'd discovered. This wasn't random theft or vandalism. Someone wanted to destroy the club's documentation, and they'd almost succeeded. She thought about the stranger again, replaying every detail. The way he'd rushed out without looking back, the cap hiding his features, the desperate speed in his movements. Sarah took a deep breath and spoke with a clarity that surprised even herself. I think I know where we can start looking. The decision was made quickly. Elijah, Linda, and Tom agreed they needed to act before whoever was responsible realized their plan had failed. The corner cafe was only a few blocks away, and if the person who'd been in the office worked there, time mattered. Sarah insisted on coming along. I saw his face, she said firmly. Just for a second when he bumped into me. I can recognize him. Elijah hesitated, but Linda placed a hand on his shoulder. The kid's already involved, and she might be our only witness. They walked through the late afternoon streets, forcing casual steps despite the tension. Sarah kept her eyes forward, mentally preparing herself. She'd only glimpsed him for a second. Angular jawline, hunched shoulders, nervous energy radiating from every movement. The corner cafe occupied a small corner building with large windows facing the street. Through the glass, Sarah could see the usual afternoon crowd. People working on laptops, couples sharing pastries, regulars reading newspapers. Behind the counter, 3 employees moved efficiently between the espresso machine and cash register. Sarah scanned each face as they entered. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully, contrasting with the gravity of their mission. Elijah ordered coffee for everyone while Sarah positioned herself where she could observe the staff without being obvious. The first barista was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes. The second was a teenager with bright pink hair and multiple piercings. Then the third employee emerged from the back room carrying a tray of clean mugs. Sarah's breath caught. Same build. That same coiled nervousness. When he turned toward the counter, she saw his profile clearly. It was him. She tugged on Linda's sleeve and gave a small nod toward the young man. Linda's expression remained neutral, but Sarah saw her jaw tighten slightly. They took their coffees to a corner table and waited. Elijah made a quiet phone call. Sarah caught fragments about "found him" and "don't let him leave." Within 20 minutes, 2 plainclothes community security members arrived, along with Mr. Harrison, the neighborhood council representative. The approach was discreet. Mr. Harrison spoke quietly with the cafe manager while Elijah positioned himself near the exit. When the young barista noticed the attention, his face drained of color. His hands trembled as he set down the pitcher of milk he'd been holding. Jeff Torres. Mr. Harrison's voice was calm but firm. The barista, Jeff, nodded slowly, his eyes darting toward the back exit. But Tom was already there, blocking that route. Jeff's shoulders sagged in defeat. They moved to the cafe's small back office, away from curious customers. Jeff sank into a plastic chair, his cap now removed, revealing a face much younger than Sarah had imagined. He couldn't have been more than 19, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. We know you were at the Bikers Club today, Elijah began, his voice surprisingly gentle. We found evidence. The window you forced open, the USB drive. It's over, son. Jeff's composure crumbled. His hands covered his face. When words came, they cracked with desperation. I didn't want to do it. I swear I didn't want to. The story came in fragments. Jeff lived with his grandfather and 2 younger brothers, ages 8 and 6. Their parents had died in a car accident 3 years back. At 16, Jeff became everything: parent, provider, protector. His grandfather's pension barely covered utilities, and Jeff's salary at the cafe was minimum wage. They were 3 months behind on rent, facing eviction. I mentioned it to Carlos, Jeff said, referring to another cafe employee. Just venting, you know? About how I didn't know what we'd do if we got kicked out. I didn't know anyone was listening. But someone had been listening. A group of businessmen who frequented the cafe, always taking the corner booth, always speaking in low tones about properties and developments. The next day, one of them had approached Jeff during his break. The man was smooth, practiced. He introduced himself as Lucas Roberts, representing Skyline Development Corporation. He'd expressed sympathy for Jeff's situation, then made an offer that seemed like salvation to a desperate teenager. He said if I could access the Bikers Club computer and install a program, they'd give me a job. Real money, enough to get my family stable again. Jeff's voice dropped to a whisper. Just data collection, he'd said. Nothing harmful. He gave me detailed instructions, the USB drive, everything. Said the club owed them money and they just needed proof. Linda leaned forward. And you believed that? Jeff shook his head miserably. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. He showed me a contract for a position in their company. Accounting assistant, $40,000 a year plus benefits. He said I'd start right after I finished the job. What Jeff hadn't known was that Skyline Development had been circling the Bikers Clubhouse for over a year. The historic mansion sat on prime real estate in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. The company had made several offers to purchase, all refused. So they'd shifted strategies. If they could prove financial mismanagement or criminal activity, they could pressure the city to condemn the property. Erasing the financial records was just the first step. The plan was to then discover fabricated evidence of money laundering and tax evasion. Documents that would mysteriously appear once the legitimate records were gone. The old building would be demolished, and Skyline would construct luxury condominiums worth millions. They used you, Sarah said quietly, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the office. Everyone turned to look at her. They found someone desperate enough to take the risk, someone they could blame if anything went wrong. Jeff looked at her, recognition dawning in his eyes. You're the girl from the door. I almost knocked you down. Fresh shame colored his face. I'm sorry. For all of it. Mr. Harrison exchanged glances with Elijah. You understand you've committed a serious crime? Breaking and entering, attempted data destruction, corporate espionage. Jeff nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know. I'll accept whatever punishment comes. Just please, my brothers and grandfather, they didn't know anything. Please don't let them suffer for what I did. The room fell silent except for Jeff's quiet sobs. Sarah watched him, seeing not a criminal but someone who'd been cornered and exploited. Still, what he'd almost done could have destroyed everything the bikers had built. The moment they returned to the clubhouse, Elijah gathered everyone available. Word spread quickly through phone calls and text messages, and within an hour, the main hall filled with members, some still in work uniforms, others having rushed over from family dinners. Elijah laid out the situation plainly. The virus had been caught in time, but they needed to assess the full extent of the damage and understand exactly what they were dealing with. More importantly, they needed to be ready for whatever Skyline Development tried next. Tom took charge of the technical recovery. He was joined by Rachel, a retired IT specialist who joined the club 2 years ago, and Kevin, a younger member who worked in cybersecurity. They set up in the office, connecting external hard drives and pulling up backup systems that most members didn't even know existed. We always kept redundancies, Tom explained to the gathered crowd. 3 years ago, we had a power surge that corrupted some files. Since then, we've maintained multiple backup protocols, cloud storage, external drives, even physical copies of critical documents. The work was meticulous. Line by line, they compared files against backups, verified timestamps, cross-referenced bank statements. Hours blurred. People brought food. Some left for family obligations. Others arrived to take their place. The clubhouse operated like a well-oiled machine, everyone understanding their role. Meanwhile, Margaret, the club's treasurer for 15 years, worked with Daniel, a paralegal, to organize their legal documentation. Every permit, every tax filing, every community event expense report. They compiled everything into a comprehensive portfolio. If Skyline wanted to challenge their legitimacy, they'd be met with ironclad evidence. Sarah stayed, doing her homework in the corner but watching everything. Linda brought her dinner and suggested she call her grandmother, who gave permission for her to remain as long as she needed. "That girl started this," Linda told Elijah quietly. "She deserves to see it through." By midnight, Tom looked up from his screen, eyes red-rimmed. "We got everything. Every single file has been restored and verified. The virus didn't complete its deletion sequence. We interrupted it too early." A collective exhale filled the room, but nobody relaxed. They all knew this was far from over. "They'll try again," Rachel said, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Different approach, maybe, but they've invested too much to give up." Elijah nodded. "So we prepare. We document everything we've learned. We keep our evidence secure. And we wait for their next move." That move came days later. A notice appeared in the community newsletter. Skyline Development Corporation had requested a special neighborhood meeting to discuss concerns regarding zoning compliance and financial transparency of local establishments. The Bikers Clubhouse was specifically mentioned. The meeting was scheduled at the community center, and attendance was mandatory for property owners. Skyline had done their homework. They'd secured the support of the zoning board chairman and brought in a lawyer specializing in municipal real estate law. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Skyline's representatives arrived in expensive suits with leather portfolios, wearing the confidence of men who'd won this battle before. Lucas Roberts, the man who'd recruited Jeff, led their presentation. They opened with the usual seduction: renderings of modern buildings, promises of rising property values, talk of economic revitalization. Then came the transition, smooth and calculated. "However," Roberts said, his tone shifting to concern, "we've discovered some troubling issues with the current occupant of the Maple Street property." He pulled up a presentation on the projector. The Bikers Club, while certainly a colorful local fixture, appears to have significant irregularities in their financial management. "We found evidence suggesting..." "That's enough." Elijah stood, his voice cutting through Roberts's rehearsed speech. "We'd like to present our own documentation, if the board doesn't mind." The zoning chairman hesitated, clearly not expecting opposition. "I suppose that's fair." What happened next was something Skyline hadn't prepared for. Margaret stepped forward with 3 large binders, each meticulously organized with colored tabs and index sections. Tom connected his laptop to the projector, displaying spreadsheets that tracked every dollar in and out of the club for the past decade. One by one, the bikers dismantled Skyline's implications. Where Roberts suggested missing funds, Margaret showed detailed receipts and bank statements. Where he implied irregular activities, Tom displayed community event permits and charitable donation records. Where he questioned their right to the property, Daniel presented the original deed, tax payments dating back 30 years, and historical society documentation recognizing the building's significance. The presentation was surgical. Sarah watched Roberts's confident smile dissolve. His colleagues shuffled papers, hunting for missed angles. The zoning chairman's expression shifted from expectant to uncomfortable. Furthermore, Elijah continued, "We've recently learned of attempts to sabotage our records through illegal means. We've reported this to the authorities and are cooperating fully with their investigation." Roberts's face went pale. He knew they knew. When the vote came, it was unanimous. The clubhouse would retain its status, and the city council would fast-track its application for historic landmark designation, a protection that would make future development attempts nearly impossible. Roberts and his associates hurried to their cars. Defeated, exposed. The old mansion had survived, not through luck, but through the community's refusal to let truth be buried under corporate ambition. The legal process moved forward differently than Jeff had feared. The district attorney reviewed the case and, given Jeff's age, his cooperation, and the circumstances that led to his choices, opted for a restorative justice approach rather than prosecution. Jeff would need to perform community service, make restitution, and participate in a rehabilitation program, but he wouldn't carry a criminal record that would destroy his future before it started. Skyline Development wasn't as fortunate. Lucas Roberts and 2 executives faced charges for conspiracy, attempted fraud, and coercion of a minor. The company's reputation took a hit that would take years to recover from, if it ever did. A few weeks later, Elijah appeared at Jeff's apartment door. The building matched Jeff's description. Old, worn, paint peeling like sunburned skin. Elijah climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked. Jeff answered, surprise and apprehension crossing his face. Behind him, Elijah glimpsed 2 young boys playing with action figures on threadbare carpet. An elderly man in a recliner, oxygen tubes trailing from his nose. Can we talk? Elijah asked. They stepped into the hallway. Jeff kept his eyes down, his posture defensive. If this is about the restitution payments, I'm working extra shifts at the cafe. I'll pay everything back, I promise. That's not why I'm here. Elijah leaned against the wall. Tell me something. Do you actually like working at that cafe? The question caught Jeff off guard. It's a job. It pays. But do you like it? Jeff shrugged. Not really. The manager's difficult, the hours are inconsistent, and the pay is terrible. But it's what I have. Elijah nodded slowly. The club needs help. Our old cafe space has been sitting empty for months. We've been talking about reopening it, but nobody has the time or expertise to run it properly. He paused, watching Jeff's reaction. We think you might. Jeff's head snapped up. What? You made a mistake. A serious one. But you owned it. Told us everything we needed to protect ourselves. Elijah crossed his arms. That takes courage. We're not interested in destroying your life. We're interested in seeing what you can build with a real opportunity. The proposal was straightforward. Jeff would manage the Clubhouse Cafe, starting small, coffee, pastries, simple lunch items. He'd receive proper training in business management from Margaret, learn inventory control from Tom, and work directly with the club members to create something the neighborhood actually wanted. The salary wasn't extravagant, but nearly double the corner cafe. Consistent hours. Health insurance that would cover his grandfather's medications. Part of his earnings would go toward restitution, but the rest would stabilize his family. Why would you trust me? Jeff asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because Sarah did. That kid could have stayed quiet when she found that napkin. She could have let us handle everything. Instead, she spoke up, even though she was scared. If an 11-year-old can have that kind of courage, I figure we can have the courage to believe people can change. Jeff started the following Monday. The first weeks tested him. Some members watched with skeptical eyes, waiting for failure or flight. Jeff felt their eyes on him constantly, felt the weight of proving himself with every cappuccino he made and every table he cleaned. But he arrived early, stayed late, learned the espresso machine's temperamental quirks, memorized how each regular took their coffee. He asked questions, accepted criticism, and slowly the atmosphere began to shift. Margaret taught him accounting, inventory tracking, cash flow management. Tom set up a point-of-sale system. Linda, initially one of his harshest critics, eventually became one of his strongest advocates after watching him comfort her grandson during a scraped knee incident. The cafe grew. Jeff started baking in the early mornings, using his grandmother's recipes that he'd nearly forgotten. The smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls drew people in. He created a community board where locals could post notices and exchange services. He remembered names, asked about families, and turned the small space into exactly what its sign promised. A place where neighbors became friends. 6 months in, proper medication stabilized his grandfather's health. His brothers thrived at school. No more eviction notices haunting their sleep. The cafe was profitable enough that Jeff could hire part-time help, giving other neighborhood teenagers the kind of legitimate opportunity he desperately needed. One afternoon, Sarah came in with her usual stack of textbooks. Jeff prepared her hot chocolate without asking. Extra marshmallows. Thanks, Jeff, she said, settling into her favorite corner table. No, he replied quietly, setting the mug down carefully. Thank you. Sarah looked up, puzzled. You could have just reported what you saw. Instead, you gave everyone a chance to make things right. Jeff glanced around. Residents chatting over coffee. The bulletin board dense with community connections. The old walls still standing strong. All of this exists because you paid attention when no one else did. Sarah smiled, a knowing look in her young eyes. You did the hard part. You chose to change. Returning to the counter, Jeff passed the window. The historic landmark plaque gleamed on the clubhouse exterior. The building skyline had tried to erase stood protected forever. He was part of its story now, not as the person who almost destroyed it, but as someone it saved. Outside, motorcycles lined the street. Inside, community thrived. And in the corner, an 11-year-old girl did her homework, still noticing everything, still caring about the details that others missed. Some lessons were worth the cost. Some second chances were worth everything. Sarah's quiet observation saved more than a building. It saved a community and gave someone a chance to rebuild their life. Have you ever noticed something small that turned out to be important? Share your story in the comments below. If this touched you, give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that remind us why details matter and second chances can change everything. See you in our next video.